Hey everybody, welcome back to the Comic Book Investment System podcast slash masterclass slash I'm just here to give you some insight into comic book investing. As always, my name is Andrew Davis, and today we are talking about the biggest problem every comic book investor faces. And it's actually a simple problem that a lot of businesses face as well. And that is this chart right here. So that is supply and demand curve, and in particular supply and demand. So obviously I got this up. I'm actually going to table this right here and pull up a website so you can see my lovely face while I talk. And same chart, it's where I got the picture from that I just showed. And this is the biggest problem that every comic book investor faces. So let's actually go through this entire chart before I explain further. So obviously you have something called supply. That's the number of comic books or of a particular book that's in the market. Then you have something called demand, which is what you want. It's the need of something, the lust of it, if you will. And it's what people say, hey, I need this item today. Typically in economics and macroeconomics, this is referred to as guns and butter. Sometimes if you're fighting a war, you need more guns than butter. And if you're fighting starvation, you need more butter than guns. Now, there's a little thing called an equilibrium price. This is when supply and demand are perfectly intersected, as you can see on this chart. So now, if there's an equilibrium price, that's a tongue twister. What winds up happening is that means that a market is healthy. Now, as you can see, there's a bunch of different little lines going. So when supply and demand meet right in the middle, that is a healthy market, and that means the item is at fair price value. When the item is above that and there's more supply and demand, that means that the item is less. It is worth less, and it's selling for less than what it is worth. And if the demand outpaces the supply, that means that it is above fair market value. Now, why is this the biggest problem that every comic book investor faces? Is because it's not that when demand outreaches supply. That's not the issue for comic book investors, but it can be. And I'll explain what I mean by that. But I'll explain the plus side of that statement first. So if demand outreaches supply, that means that the item is wanted more than what is out there, which means that the price is trading above fair market value. And that usually is not a problem because somebody's willing to pay a premium to get the item because the demand outpaces the supply. But that can be a problem, and I'll explain why. Because it could get to the point where the demand fetches such a value that nobody can afford it, or very few people can afford it. And as a result, it becomes that the item is harder to sell. And that can be a massive problem per se. Because if all of a sudden you have an item that really fetches $250, but nobody can afford, or very few people can afford to pay $250 for said item, you're going to have a hard time selling it, and that you really can't undercut anybody because you're going to be hurting yourself in the long run, and you don't want to force an equilibrium price back down, which is sometimes what happens when demand outreaches supply and nobody can afford something. The price has to naturally come down, and you don't want to be the guy that does that, and nobody else is doing it. And even if you are doing it, great, somebody still can't afford a $50 reduction because it has reached a point where it is so out demanded of the supply that it has to come down even further beyond that, and you really can't go below down 20%. So that becomes a problem because now the type of buyer you're looking for doesn't exist, or there's three of them and there's 15 books, which means that it becomes a problem. The other side of this equation is that when the supply becomes so big and the demand becomes so low, and this is the fear of every comic book investor, because comic book investing is a speculation combined with past performance and just a gut feeling. A little bit of science is also involved in it, where certain things have performed X in the past, and they will continue to perform X in the future to some degree. Now, it's not a perfect science, but it definitely sort of goes along that route. Now, the biggest fear and the biggest problem is that when a company prints X amount of a book, we're going to use round numbers, they print 1,000 of a book, but only 800 people want that book. That forces the person who bought that book, as well as the consumer, to recognize it. Man, I want that book, but there's a surplus of 200 on the demand. And so now I can offer 15, but the book initially sold for 20. And that is the biggest fear that every comic investor faces, because it is at that point that the item is selling under value, and it happens. And this is the biggest fear. And I can't keep on saying that enough here, because what that means is that goes to the point of you're underwater. You have to take a loss if you want to sell it. What you hope for is that you could withstand the storm of it, and that it rises, and that it goes back up to either an equilibrium. As I was saying, when demand, I'm going to restart here because obviously I'm live here and clearly my internet is being wonky today. So, what I was saying is, okay, I'm going to wait about 10 seconds because I got a feeling that a bunch of stuff was just missed here. And where I'm going with this is that when demand exceeds supply, people will pay it because they want that item. And obviously, there is less of the book and more people want it. When supply exceeds demand, that means that there's more of the book and less people want it. And so everybody who wants it can get it, and then there's some left over. Now, in the first scenario, you can always lower your price, which will force a price back to equilibrium. And people tend to do that. And I've done this on my eBay business where somebody's asking 75 or $100 for a book. I'll offer somebody 90. I paid 30 for the book. I'm making a boatload of money in the process, and that actually restores the book back down to fair value, and I make the sale. And then somebody else, once that sale occurs, might drop their price to 95 after me. And I've seen it. I've done it myself. Where somebody sold the book for 90, I was at 100, I dropped my price for the next buyer at 95, and it starts restoring the price down to equilibrium. That is when demand exceeds supply. When supply exceeds demand, there is no cure for that scenario, which means that I, as an investor, and you, obviously, you're interested in watching this, have to eat the fat. And it's a very complicated entity because I can't force demand when supply exceeds, demand. Now, technically, I can wait, put the book back into a long box, and hopefully in 5 years or 6 months or however long it is, Disney or DC or something else happens in the comic realm that forces that book to come back to an equilibrium point, and the demand for that becomes more, I guess, baited, for lack of a better word here. But I, as an individual, have no control. In a demand exceeding supply scenario, I have absolute control. And so that is extremely crucial to understand. And that is the biggest fear here when every comic book investor is going into this. It's not that demand exceeds supply, it's supply exceeds demand, because you have no control and you are at the mercy of the buyer and the outside forces, because you cannot force a demand. You can control supply. When demand exceeds supply, you can control it or you can bring it back down. It's very hard to raise a book up to an equilibrium price unless you control 100 books. I know people with certain books that bought 50 Clan Cranes out of, a 500 print run, and they can technically control supply. And so they can actually affect demand and supply. And if they take their 50 books and take them off of eBay, that affects the book's price. And they could slowly release that. And if you buy enough of a book, you can technically do that. If there's a 250 print run of a certain book and you bought 50 of those books, you now control supply and demand. But it is very, very, very hard to do that. And if you're a comic shop and you ordered 1,000 copies of a book and you slowly leak them out, and it's a good book and it's a hot book, it's a key issue with a key person, and you knew it, you can control supply and demand. But it is extremely hard in a free market, which is what comics is, between eBay, Facebook Marketplace, and several other sites. And that is the biggest fear that I have as a comic book investor. And that is the biggest fear a lot of people have, and they won't admit it. But I am here to admit what my fears are. I am not scared of making a bad investment. I am terrified of this chart right here, because this chart, when supply exceeds demand, so when there is more supply and nobody's interested in a book, I don't have any control. When there's a huge demand for a particular book and there's an extremely low supply, I have all the control in the world. And I have several books that the demand for it is so high that within about 5 minutes that I put a book up on eBay that somebody wants, it is gone. And it is gone at the price I want. There's no negotiation. They're like, I'm paying, and can you get it out to me tomorrow? I'm like, can't do it. I can get it out to you on Saturday because they paid on Friday. They're like, that's fine. Saturday's fine. They don't even argue with me. They don't argue with me about shipping because the demand is so high. So that is what I wanted to tackle tonight in particular, and really show this, because I think that if you want to be in this space, or you're already in this space, you need to really understand this chart. And if you do not like this chart terrifies you, it scares you, you're not willing to confront it, then maybe you need to rethink your choices as a person who's dealing with commodities, because that's what comics are when you are an investor. It is a commodity. It's not a stock, it's not a bond, it's not a cryptocurrency, it's not real estate. While all those things technically are also commodities, they operate differently. When you are buying a thing and selling that thing for more money, it is a commodity. It is no different than guns and butter. It is no different than that. It really is not. And I understand that it sounds rough when I say it, it sounds mean, and it's all right, but I am just giving you the honest truth here, because I think that's what needs to be said sometimes. So that's everything that I got for you. This is what I do, this is what I talk about, and this is what I enjoy talking about. And look, I don't think anybody talks about this. I don't. And I think it's a problem. And that's why I'm here, because while I do have a comic book class coming that is behind a paywall, it's going to be on Udemy. Hopefully, it's going to be on Locals, Substack. I'm going to try to get it everywhere I can get it. Maybe I'll get it on Patreon. I'll find some other places to put it if I can. Excuse me. Because I want everybody to be able to, afford it, buy it. I'm not trying to make it too expensive. 40, 50 bucks for about an 18 to 22 hour class, I think, is a pretty reasonable price point. But again, I also understand that not everybody, A, wants to take that class, and B, can afford it. And so I do believe in free education, and that's why I'm doing this here. And I'm going to be very honest with everybody. My class is very direct. It is going to give you something beyond this. But if you just sit here and you like what I talk about, you're going to get a lot of different information. Again, I apologize for my cough. I'm coming down with something sick. It's been a long week. But as I was stating, I do believe in free education and giving tidbits of information when I can. And I do think that that is a big thing. And so I get it. If you can't afford it, or you don't want to take that class, but you just want something that's going to spark your brain and you're going to think a little bit, that's what this is for. And if you like what I'm talking about and you like where I'm going with this, this is an excellent supplement to my class that will give you the fundamentals that you need to become a better comic book investor. So that's everything here that I got for you. Again, once you understand this, this is the biggest fear that every investor faces in comics, whether they want to admit it or not, whether they thought about it, because the second this happens, and the second scenario two happens, where supply exceeds demand, it is truly, truly terrifying. And it is something that you will face on a daily basis. And every investment you make, you got to ask yourself this question. And you should refer this to this chart, because this is something that is basic macroeconomics, but it is true to this day. So that's pretty much everything I got for everybody here. Thank you for watching. I appreciate it. Again, we're talking about comic book investing. We're talking about your money, and we're just dealing with the truth of it. And it's somewhat ugly, but it's also somewhat true. And so that's what we're dealing with. And I hope you find it as interesting as I do, as well as informative, and you appreciate my thoughts on the topic, because I don't see anybody talking about it like this. This is a business, there's money involved, and that's what we're doing on this show. Every Friday, maybe a few Saturdays, and we're talking about the dirty stuff in comic book investing that nobody's talking about. Anyway, my name's Andrew Davis. You can follow me on Pop Anime Comics. You can check me out pretty much anywhere else. I do run a few other shows. Conversations in Pop Culture is my other show. We talk about nothing related to investing. I just interview a lot of cool people. And you can follow me on social media right now at Pop Anime Comics on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, as well as the Comic Book Investment System Masterclass on Facebook. You type in Comic Book Investment Masterclass, it's going to come up. And again, October 5th, my class is coming, so definitely be on the lookout for that. I'm telling you, it's going to be a great class. You're going to learn a lot, and whether you're brand new to comic book investing, you're an old-time veteran, or you're somewhere in between, you're going to get a refresher, you're going to get a lot of education, you're going to get thought-provoking positions, and it will make you a better comic book investor overall, because we, and what I mean by we, is me, teach the basics, because I don't tell you what books to buy. I'm going to tell you how to do research, budgeting, CGC and grading, and exits, and that's just class 1. And that's the whole class for you, the syllabus. And I got about 14 more classes coming, and I'm stoked. And so you stick with me. I promise you that I'm going to give you everything I know about this space. And I can tell you one thing, I have made a fuck ton of money in this space. And I think anybody can do it. And I want you to win. I want you to win. I don't know where you're at in life. I don't know how much money you're going to make. But I believe with the basics and the right education, anybody can become wealthy and rich. I believe that. So on that note, I'm going to leave all of you on that one. I hope you enjoy this. Check it out. Enjoy it. And I hope you get something out of this, because I love talking about this stuff. I love talking about it, and I love educating people on these topics. So thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.